Hi, my name is Sam Gatton, and I'm going to be providing a mini workshop on transitions for students with autism spectrum disorder. A good place to start is to talk about what autism spectrum disorder is. And so the DSM-5, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, which psychologists use to help diagnose conditions, it states that people with autism spectrum disorder have a difficulty with communication and interaction with other people, restricted interests and repetitive behaviors, and symptoms that hurt the person's ability to function properly in school or work and other areas of life. And I would just add there, without proper intervention, because that's what this talk is all about. So the needs of students with autism, um, it's important to know that they can thrive in classrooms, but they do need some intervention. So routine is especially important, adding visual cues and written instructions, focusing not only on academic supports, but social supports as well, and then limiting distractions in the classroom and to avoid sensory overload. And it's just important to believe that your students with autism can succeed with these right interventions. Specifically, transitions in school have been an area of concern for students with autism. So what I mean by transitions is switching academic tasks, going from English to math or from math to science, switching whatever you're doing in the classroom. And it's also the periods where you might be moving between places, so entering the classroom or leaving the classroom, either to go to and from a special education classroom to the general ed classroom, or from lunch to recess, gym class, things like that. And typically it can be challenging for students with autism. So the article review that I did was a paper that developed a protocol called Schedules, Tools, and Activities for Transitions, otherwise known as STAT. And I do know there's another acronym, STAT, that's used in the autism field, but this is Schedules, Tools, and Activities for Transitions when I say STAT. So this was developed by researcher Susanna Ayadarola and her team, and they saw a need for a more complete package of intervention strategies to be used in K through 12 schools. So past research had looked at intervention strategies, but they were just single intervention strategies and studying how effective it was. So though evidence-based, teachers would still have to kind of pick and choose, and they thought there needed to be a more complete package. So they developed STAT from previous research, and then they did randomized control trials between two groups, so a treatment group and then a waitlist group, and there was 150 students, 56 teachers, and 57 classrooms, and it was split pretty evenly, about half in each group. And what their primary measure was going to be was engagement following a transition. So their hypothesis was that successful transitions will lead to more engagement in the activity that follows. However, they ran into a sort of ceiling effect where there was really high levels of engagement before treatment and after, so there was no significant difference. However, another thing that they measured was they had teachers identify challenging behaviors, target behaviors, and they measured whether they happen less frequently and less intense after treatment, or if there was a difference. And they did find there was less frequency of those target behaviors and less intense, which shows that applying this protocol did have some positive outcomes. And so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what this STAT protocol was and what was done, because I think that's most helpful for future teachers to learn about. A couple things to note, though, is that you can't learn everything from just reading this STAT manual, so they had highly expertised coaches meet with teachers and help them to implement it, which you're not going to get, but you can learn the steps, which could be valuable. So here are the steps of STAT, and I'll move out of the way, so if you're going to pause it, you can read it. I'll be going over each of these, so I'm not going to run through them right now, but if you'd like to pause to read them, you can go ahead and do that. And we'll go on to the first step. So the first step is to provide a warning for the transition. And the reason that this is important is it signals that the current activity is about to end, and it gives the student a chance to finish what they are doing. Without a warning, they have no chance to finish what they're doing, and that can be stressful for a student. And then it's also the first step for the student to learn what is going to be expected of them. So for example, by saying in 5 minutes we're going to clean up the toys, you can help reduce the child's anxiety about what he should be doing next and when he'll have to do it. And then third, these warnings help students get used to the idea that they're going to be moving on to something else. The next step is a signal to gain the student's attention. So we know that students with autism spectrum disorder can become fixated on certain things. And so when you give that warning, they might not even hear you. It's not that they're ignoring you, but you might totally be tuned out. So it's important to get their attention through a signal. And this will be based on you knowing who your students with autism are. What signal is going to work? Is it saying their name? Is it clapping your hands? Flicking a switch of the light might not be appropriate for certain students. That might, be stressful, but for others, that might be a signal that could work. So it's up to teachers to learn and understand that. So then moving on, step 3 is clearly communicating the transition-related goal through clear and simple language, describing specifically what they are to do. So, for example, get ready for lunch is not specific or clear. However, put your book away and line up to wash your hands, that is specific. It tells what they are supposed to do. And this can reduce the anxiety for students about what is to come. Moving on to step 4, this is providing examples of how they are to complete the transition. So if you were to say put your book away and a student screams, I don't want to, but then they throw their book in their desk, well, they technically did it, but was that a successful transition? Probably not. It could be disrupting to other students. So also saying how they are to complete it is important. So quietly, or you may whisper, or keeping your hands at your side, those are important as well. So we know that students with autism oftentimes don't have the best time management, so setting a time expectation can be really important for them. And this kind of goes concurrently with the steps before. You're also going to want to say you have 5 minutes to complete this task, or 30 seconds. And then we know students with autism do well with visual cues, so adding some type of timer displayed in the classroom can also really benefit this step. Moving on to step 6, it seems obvious, but you need to watch the students to see if they're following through doing what they're supposed to do during this transition. Because you need to identify whether you're going to move on to step 7 or step 8. So whether you're going to need to give them redirection or reinforce what they did with some positive praise. So for example, if they need redirection, it might be frustrating for a teacher, but it's important to stay calm and just simply, restate the instructions that you had previously given to the student. However, if at step 6 you see them and they do just fine with the transition, you can reinforce the success with positive praise. That could be saying, thank you for quietly lining up to wash your hands. For other students that they might need, for positive reinforcement, they might need point systems or rewards or some type of thing like that, which is often common with students with autism spectrum disorder. Up to teachers to learn about their students. And then the last step is signal end of transition. And really the signal for ending the transition is actually usually just the start of the next activity. So this is important that the student realizes what we were doing is now over, and now we are moving on. And it can help motivate them to want to move on if there's a clear start to the next thing, because they might not want to be left out. So those were the 9 steps of STAT. And I hope that was somewhat valuable to learn about. Like I said, when they did this study, they had coaches really helping them out with worksheets, role play, so they could learn and practice these steps. It was hard to get a sense of exactly what this protocol looks like without that, but I think it was valuable for me to learn about, and I hope I could share some of that with you. Some conclusions and curiosities I have. One conclusion is that, like I said, that coaching had to be very important, and there was they did measure fidelity. So how honestly were teachers purposely carrying out intervention strategies, and they found that the teachers who went through this STAT coaching and protocol had a higher fidelity in carrying out intervention strategies for their students. One thing I was really curious about is where is this going, STAT. So if you do a Google search of schedules, tools, and activities for transition, little comes up besides this study and the manual that went with it. And I'm curious, was there a need to package these interventions? And are we going to see more of this in the future? And then lastly, it did seem to work, because students whose teachers did receive the STAT coaching, they did show less frequent and intense challenging behaviors. So it was successful in that regard. And so I'd like to just, and so there is the email. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. Bye. Say thank you for checking out this presentation. I will pop up my email address on screen here, actually, if you have any questions.